Hello, everyone, and welcome to the Dyslexia Life Hack Show. I'm your host, Matthew Head. In this episode, I'm talking to Rachel Morgen-Trimmer. She's a neurodiversity coach who has autism with ADHD. She provides training on neurodiversity to organisations for staff at all levels. She's also the founder of a publisher. You should check out her post on autism, which has won a Rose Award. We're going to look at, as part of this episode, how the hyperlexic people and dyslexic people can work together to achieve great things. I will post links to things we talk about in the show notes, which will be available at dyslexialifehacks.com/podcast. Welcome to the show, Rachel.
Thank you.
It's great to have you here, and I think it's going to be a really interesting conversation. But I thought, first of all, I'd jump onto something that kind of piqued my interest while checking out your profile. You took a gap year quite late on in your life and learned to drive at the same time, which seems like a later on age. What sort of prompted you to do them two things together?
I learnt to dive, not to drive. That is such a dyslexic thing as well.
Yeah, fellow, I passed the requirement at the first hurdle. I was like, why would you learn to drive? Yeah.
I like that. I learnt to... I went on a gap year when I was... I left when I was 29, came back when I was 30. And I did that because I just wanted to... I was fed up of everything. I just wanted to leave and go travelling. And the actual significant thing about when I learnt to dive on that gap year in Thailand was because it was the first time I was any good at a sport.
Oh, okay.
In being autistic, and I'm mildly dyspraxic as well, so I'm rubbish at sport. It's one of those things where you can't really join in if you're not very good.
Yes, I see.
So to be told that I was good at a sport was quite a revelation to me, because I'd always been put off it before. You know, at school, if you're no good, you don't get picked for the team. People don't pass you the ball or anything, and it just all feels a bit rubbish, and it's something that you can't enjoy. And I was never taught to enjoy things for their own sake. Whereas, you know, with diving, the point of it is to go slowly, which I'm really good at when it comes to sport. And it was just really nice to have a different way of looking at things, I suppose. And now I play five-a-side for football for food banks. So we pay fee every week to use the pitch, and whatever's left over from the pitch hire goes to the food bank. So it's really good. But it's grassroots football, and it's designed to be inclusive. So there's all kinds of people there. And I've never played football before I joined, and it's just lovely to be included, because they know if they kick the ball to me, I will mess up the pass, and then I'll just give away the ball to the other team because I'm so terrible. But it doesn't matter.
Yeah.
And it's the first time in my life that I've actually enjoyed a team sport. So being autistic, teams are not something that we're very good at on the whole. We don't understand what other people are doing. So to play a team sport is quite a revelation that it was something that I could enjoy.
Yeah. So is it more the autism side that's a problem with sport, or the dyspraxia, or just a blend of both?
It's both of those, and having ADHD, because I can't always focus.
Yes,
I'll be standing in the middle of the pitch thinking about my dinner instead of, watching where the ball's going. But it's also, I think it's also could exist just outside of that. Some of us are just rubbish at sport for no particular reason. It's just just how we are, which is fine. And I think I'm using the term being rubbish at sport, which is a very, very general thing. I don't think anyone is rubbish at all sports. I think there's always something that we can do. And it's not necessarily about being rubbish, because it's something measurable. You could be slow, but that can be okay. With diving, or maybe even walking or something. Or you could be not particularly strong, so maybe yoga is better for you. Or if you're not flexible, then perhaps doing weights is better. So I'm saying this in a very general sense, but I don't actually. It's an example of how so ingrained something is. I'm rubbish at sport. I was told that. I think I'm rubbish at sport, and then and I'm still saying that like it's a thing, and it's really not. I'm not very good at a lot of sports. I'm all right at some, and at least I turn up.
Yes, yeah. And unless you're competing competitively in sports, there's supposed to be a fun way of getting some good exercise and some social interaction. I mean, I'm also quote unquote rubbish at sports, but but I really into kind of weightlifting and bits and pieces like that. And I suppose that is a sport. And I'm okay at it. And my current world's strongest man is autistic. So
yes, he is.
Yeah, there is, people do get going in sports. And it's interesting how we hang on to these things and sort of, yes, I might not be the next rugby player, star or whatever, but why can't we just go have some fun with sport, which is what we're supposed to be doing with it, really? And then some people get really good and make a career out of it. Yeah,
absolutely.
So I was sort of thinking, really, to get some background on autism from yourself, just to kind of, I've touched into it, but I can't say I know it too well, but I thought you'd be an ideal person to set the scene on how autism is and your experience with it.
Yeah, it's very hard to sum up autism because it is a very complex way of being. It's still classified as a disability. Yes. Legally, that's actually quite helpful.
Yeah, I can imagine.
It is, because it gives you legal protection, especially at work, which is really good. And, protection against discrimination in getting services or whatever. A lot of people don't identify with that. A lot of people see it as a difference. And when I do training and I ask people, is this a disability or a difference? Quite a common response is, well, actually, it's a bit of both. So it's a different way of thinking, and it's quite it's divergent from normal people anyway, but it's more divergent from dyslexia in a lot of cases, particularly with me because I'm hyperlexic, which means I have a particular talent for reading and writing. So I can read very quickly, for example, and I have a very wide vocabulary. And I can use the right words to craft exactly what I want to say. If you look at my social media, you might not believe that because I sometimes write in a rush. But if you ask me to write something, I could write it quite quickly, but still quite well, which was quite good because I've got ADHD, so I like to do things quickly. So the hyperlexia is an example of how autism tends to involve attention to detail. So we are detail-oriented, detail-focused, and traditionally the stereotype has been that's got to be maths, it's got to be numbers, it's got to be data, it has to be dispassionate numbers, coding. We do have a lot of autistics in technology, a lot of autistics in IT. There are many programs supporting autistic people in IT because that is a job where you do find a lot of autistic people, which is great. It's great that people can do what they're good at, but I think there's a risk that we forget that the autistic attention to detail can exist in many, many different fields. And for me, it's words. And I didn't choose that. I didn't choose to be good at reading and writing or whatever, but I do enjoy it because I love books, I love words. And I think as well, it's indicative that autism is underdiagnosed in women because women tend to, for whatever reason, have their attention to detail focused on things that you might consider traditionally feminine interests or stereotypical interests rather than what we might consider boys' subjects. I've just done air quotes.
Yes.
If you're just listening to this, I just did air quotes when I said boys' subjects. Maths, engineering, IT, that's all. It's traditionally been boys' stuff. It's still seen as boys' stuff. We still don't have enough women in those fields. And that's where people think autism is and doesn't exist outside that. So one of the things I try and do as a woman who is autistic is try and promote this idea that you can be autistic and an artist. You can be autistic and a linguist. You can be autistic and a craftsperson. You can be, like you mentioned, autistic and the world's strongest man. That's not a traditional autistic job.
No, not at all.
But you see, sometimes we get the narrative, oh, look how well he's done. He's autistic, but he's done this. He's done this despite his autism. And it's actually because of his autism, because he's got that attention to detail and that commitment to working on something that's a passion of his, a special interest of his. That's why he's good.
Yes, yeah. I'm sort of taking away, and what my kind of understanding is that you can almost get sort of complete tunnel vision into that kind of thing and super focused and sense all the details out of like in your case, out of the page and with the writing.
Yeah. So pretty much all autistics, I shouldn't say all because I've not met them all. Most autistic people have special interest.
Yeah.
Almost all. Some have several. So some of mine include the TV series Inside Number 9.
Right. Okay. Yeah.
And I own the signed script books in a set. I've got the Insider's Guide. I've listened to the podcast. I've been to see Smith and Pemberton, who wrote the series, twice. Okay. So when I say special interest, it's not just watching the show, it's sort of getting heavily involved in something. And another of mine is another traditionally feminist interest, which is cooking. Yes. And that's one reason I didn't realise I was autistic for so many years, is because it said you have to have a special interest to be autistic. And I was like, well, I don't memorise car number plates. I'm not heavily into collecting Lord of the Rings action figures. Right. And I thought, because I didn't recognise cooking, because I thought, well, everyone cooks, don't they? But not everyone owns 200 cookbooks. No, they did not. How do you have a house big enough for that? I do manage to. Quite a lot of the house is devoted to cookbook storage. I also have a collection of vintage cookbooks as well. Okay. That's part of my interest is in collecting old-fashioned cookbooks such as Barbara Cartland's The Romance of Food, which was it was a wedding present. It's a terrible book. It's pink, and every photo is accompanied by these little china figures, and the food's always awful in these old books. But there's something I love about them because it's part of social history and it's women's history. Yes. Because women so often get excluded, but you can understand some of the messages they were receiving, which are not that different from the messages we get today about, how to look after your family and how to impress people and stuff. And that's something that's missing from a lot of sort of traditional history. So that's one reason that you're looking for footprints in the snow, basically, aren't you? The tracks of it. Yeah. Yeah, absolutely. That's a lovely way of putting it. Yeah, I can kind of see that. So you mentioned in that bit about finding out you're autistic. How did that come about? I have no clue how you get quote unquote diagnosed autistic. So how did you sort of come to a realization of your parents, and what sort of age were you? I was 30 something when I first got the twinges that I might be autistic. Right. Because of certain ways I was about being very particular about things. For example, with reading and writing and being quite particular about spelling, and we'll perhaps talk about that in a little bit, because that has a very significant relationship with how I was with dyslexic people. Yes. Emotional dysregulation, getting very upset about things and so on, and then discovering that cooking actually could be a special interest if you were as weird about it as I am. Yeah. And so I tried to get a diagnosis for a while. I went to the GP a couple of times. The first time they said there's no money to diagnose you, so we're not referring you, which they're not supposed to do, by the way. Okay. That's outside the guidelines. Their budgeting, isn't anyone else's issue. They need to sort it out because that's their responsibility. Women, of course, do get brushed off a lot more than men for everything, not just autism diagnosis, but particularly these things that are traditionally male. It was the same with ADHD. Okay. I went for a private diagnosis, but I didn't think they were good enough to diagnose me. So eventually what happened, I was referred to high-level psychotherapy for my mental health issues. A lot of autistic people have mental health issues for various reasons. Mine were quite complex, so I got to go to, on the NHS actually, it was quite a high level of psychotherapy. And when we were talking about what was wrong with me, and I'm not using air quotes there because there are things wrong with me. Autism is not one of them, but there were there were other things. Right. And I said, I think I'm autistic. I certainly have autistic traits. And he gave me a referral to the some autism diagnosis place here in Manchester. And the form, when I looked at it, it was still boy stuff, a lot of tick boxes. autistic people tend to like forms, so boxes and things like that. So that was all right. And then I think it was 2 years after that, I finally got to do the diagnosis, which was quite an unpleasant process. And I think if people are thinking about the diagnosis process, being aware of that, it's not awful. It's not fun because it's done by neurotypicals. That means normal people, or in some cases, in this case, non-autistic people.
Yes. Yeah, I don't know who normal people are, to be honest.
Yeah, exactly. It's very deficit-based, which means they look at what's wrong with you. So they don't go in and go, oh, you think you're autistic, what are you really good at? Which is how I approach it.
Yeah.
What are you really into? What's your special interest? Why, what are you excited about? What do people tell you you're good at? What do you think you're good at? What are you really particular about? And that's the kind of stuff that, for me, really gives a clear picture of autism. But when you do the diagnosis, it's like, you don't do this, you don't do that. And it's a little bit being like a bug under a microscope, because they tell you to do stuff and then they watch you do it and you don't know what they're looking for. And it's really hard because you have to get through the process, but you have to be autistic enough that you get a diagnosis. Because people my age, I'm 47,
right.
I've been used to acting like a normal person my entire life. And it's second nature to me now, like saying rubbish at sport. It's something I don't think about. It's automatic. Like on this call today, I'm pretending to be normal with you. I didn't bring any fidget toys with me today. And normally I would be, it's partly for your listeners as well, because I don't sound to muck up what I'm saying.
Oh, of course. Yes. Thank you.
But I spent so long pretending to be normal, and it's so ingrained that you have to kind of make a conscious effort to autism it up in your assessment. So you get that assessment, so you get what you need. Yes. And I'm now on a post-diagnosis course. I'm not sure what it's supposed to do, but it's a group of late diagnosed autistic people, and I think it's learning about autism and learning how to cope. And it's been quite an eye-opener for me, because obviously I knew I was autistic long before I got my diagnosis, and self-diagnosis is valid, by the way. You don't have to have someone else say you're autistic for you to be autistic. If you say, yeah, I'm autistic because of this, you don't even have to justify it. If you're autistic, you're autistic. Yeah, it doesn't matter what. It's very much an ingrained feeling if you are autistic.
Yeah.
So I knew that for a long time before I got my diagnosis. There are other people who it's fairly new to them. They have a much more negative view of it than I do, because obviously I work in this industry, and it's been quite challenging for them to wrap their heads around it. And it's useful for me to know that, because I'm more, I'm really positive about autism. It's part of my job. I'm like, these are the strengths, blah, blah, blah. But I think it's really important to recognize that a lot of autistic people have challenges. A lot of people who are diagnosed really struggle with that diagnosis. They have a really negative view of it. And I think we need to have a realistic picture of how different people understand and process being autistic, because it's not a bed of roses for a lot of people. I mean, it wasn't for me, and I had a better experience than a lot of people.
Were you in the neurodiversity coaching world when you got formally diagnosed, or was that something that had come off the back of it? So you actually, at that point, you were doing something else, and then it's kind of switches over?
No, I was self-diagnosed and did this job before I got my official diagnosis, and no one ever questioned it, which I thought was interesting, because I say I'm autistic, and no one said, give me your paperwork, prove it.
You don't look like an autistic person or whatever. Yeah, sometimes I think when I put a post on social media and spelt it properly and it makes sense, I'm like, people just think I'm making this up if they're not dyslexic themselves.
Yeah.
Okay, but the ADHD, was that found out at a similar time, or was that something you then found out later on?
I started first identified with the main characteristics of ADHD in my mid-20s. But again, I'm not boys ADHD, I'm girls ADHD, which is it's a bit of a misnomer. There's two kinds of ADHD. There's hyperactive, where you're bouncing around all the time, and there's inattentive. So the hyperactive one is supposed to be boys' ADHD and the inattentive one is girls' ADHD. But I looked this up recently and that's actually not true.
Okay. Okay.
I think my personal theory is that girls tend to tamp down the hyperactive bits. They're more diagnosed with inattentive than hyperactive, but it's just because they get told off for mucking around more so than boys. That's a personal theory. I don't have anything to back it up.
I can see that. You get socialised to not play around, so you learn how to suppress it.
Yeah, exactly. So because hyperactive ADHD type 1 is much more common, it's commonly known, or it was at the time, I wasn't sure if I had ADHD because I didn't bounce around. I'm actually quite lazy. I like lying on the sofa. And then I discovered type 2 inattentive ADHD, and that was bang on. It's daydreaming. It's staring out of the window. It's not paying attention, not focusing, being distracted easily, having lots of ideas is common to both kinds of ADHD. I mean, I love having ADHD. It's a real benefit to a lot of things that I do, from everything from my day job to having kids.
Yeah.
Okay. If you've got more than one kid, you need to focus on more than one thing at a time.
Yes.
Which is sort of going in different directions.
Okay.
So I've never been formally diagnosed with ADHD because I've never found anyone who I trusted to diagnose me properly. Again, when I was actually referred to the Priory for an ADHD diagnosis, and they sent me this form, and it was boys stuff. And I thought, you're not qualified to diagnose me. You don't know anything about ADHD in women, which can present quite differently. It doesn't necessarily feel differently, but like you said about cultural and social expectations, it can present very differently. It was identified by a coach. I got myself an ADHD coach because I wasn't coping with anything. And I found this coach in America. And in the first session, she was saying, what were you like at university? Did you hand everything in last minute? Did you do this? Did you do that? And she was the person who very much confirmed that I have ADHD, and also got me to understand that it was a benefit, not necessarily a deficit. I really like the superpower thing. I treat my ADHD like a superpower. A lot of people are very uncomfortable with that terminology.
Yes.
Because they think it minimizes the challenges. But I think of superpowers as being some people think it's just all good stuff. It's all a cape and flying around and doing cool stuff. Whereas we know in reality, if you are really good at stuff, that comes with challenges that sort of not offset it in a way, but we all have challenges. Anyone who's good at anything in particular or commits himself very much to something, there's always something missing, or there's always something challenging that you might not necessarily see, if that makes sense.
Yeah, it does. I've heard of, and I can't remember where I picked this up from, but shadow of the strength. So Superman has got this ridiculously high level of strength, but it does mean sometimes he will have a shadow of it, which is he overpowers things, bits and pieces like that. And I like that idea. You have a strength, like a big pyramid of stuff you're really good at, but it does cast a shadow, and in that area can be other things, which I think is just another way of looking at what you just described.
Yeah, that's a really good way of looking at it. And I really like the fact that you look at that in a very three-dimensional way.
Yes. Oh, yes.
Which is a very dyslexic thing to do. And that's one of my, I wouldn't call it a blind spot, but I'm rubbish at that, because I'm all about the detail with the, being autistic, the detail and the words and all of this. I'm really not very good at shapes and 3 dimensions and looking at where the shadow is going to be cast and stuff like that. So I'm terrible at certain games that rely on things like patterns and shapes and stuff like that.
So, yes, that's interesting. So it's quite obvious by what I was saying that I'm spinning the pyramid around in my head and through the shadow, and you're not seeing that. So how does your world look in terms of being able to focus on detail and going into it? I'm going to try and picture it, because that's how my brain works. So in my mind, I'm forming an image, but I'm curious to see how your mind kind of starts working and interacting with the world, and sort of talking to people like myself who are constantly trying to flip everything into an analogy and an image.
I actually find analogies and images quite helpful. I do have a very vivid internal world, and I think that's partly from having to be so inward looking for various reasons. I have a lot of escapism and fantasy, and because I read a lot of books with the words, I had to create that world in my head. So when I read a book, I can see what's happening. I can't see faces. I'm face blind.
Oh, interesting. Okay. Yeah.
Yeah. So if I picture someone, I can't see their face, but I'll know, what they're wearing or where they live or something like that. But face blindness is something that I believe is more common amongst autistic people.
Oh, interesting.
Yeah.
So if you're reading a book that gets turned into a movie, you don't have a problem with the actor or actress looking different to what you imagined, I guess.
No, it's sometimes, yeah, sometimes a bit not what I was expecting, but because I've never pictured that person that clearly, I don't always, it's not always particularly jarring. I do find when I'm watching films that it's very difficult to follow them.
Okay.
There's a lot of people who look similar. So Reservoir Dogs was challenging because all white men with brown hair in the same outfit, which is a suit and tie. I had no idea who was who. So if you consider watching imagine Reservoir Dogs and everyone's played by the same person.
Yes, yeah.
That's what it was like watching it with me. So I quite often watch films with other people so I can ask who is that person or this person. And if it's something like a flashback as well, that's quite challenging because I don't know if it's the same person.
Okay.
In the flashback. So you might not necessarily realise it's a flashback, if you see what I mean. And because I've got ADHD, I'm not always paying attention. So yeah, funnily enough, I really enjoy watching films, but I do kind of quite often have to have a helper.
Oh, okay.
Normally my husband.
Yes. Is your husband quote unquote neurotypical or?
He is. He's neurotypical. He is also very talented. And I find in a lot of cases, I get on very well with neurotypicals who have a particular strong talent in some area. So that might be, in his case, it's words again.
Oh,
he's a copywriter, does advertising and stuff.
Wow.
Yeah. And in other cases, it's not necessarily a work skill that I find makes us get on. It might be some of my friends have very good people skills, which I don't. So I find those people really, really good to get on with. So a lot of the people in my world are have very strong qualities in some areas, and sometimes that might be a social quality. Really good at people, a lot of friends, very popular sort of person because they always understand what people need, for example. So not something you can sort of encapsulate on a CV, like, good with words or good at imagining 3 dimensions, but that kind of much more soft skill where, which are, vital in a lot of cases, but I think underrated still.
Yeah, I think there is this, it's like having the person on a team who's really good at social adhesion of the team, provides the social glue. And there's no way of measuring that. There's no KPI for that. But if you took them out, the team wouldn't function as well, but they might not be the most productive person on a KPI because they are the social glue of the team. And it's really interesting how the sort of nuances of team dynamics are hard to kind of track, isn't it? What gets measured gets managed, and that's not getting measured at all.
Yeah, I think that's a really interesting way of putting it, the social glue. And in my experience, dyslexics are better at identifying those people and those characteristics than, say, somebody like me, because you can almost see the pattern of the people and how they interact, which is quite something that I would find quite difficult.
Oh, I see. I hadn't thought of it like that, actually. But yeah, being a pattern thinker and looking at patterns, you can see, the kind of the unofficial hierarchy and relationships of a particular group and the group dynamics. And do I do that? Maybe I do. I'm always talking to people and getting on with people. So maybe, I don't know. Just assume by learning to get on with everybody. But it's interesting thinking about how things may be a trait of dyslexia or what is a trait of the non-dyslexia side of my personality. Yeah. And I must think the same with the autism and ADHD. One thing that came up to mind when you talk about watching movies and getting distracted, do you find the immersive experience being in a cinema removes some of that?
Yeah, it does depend a lot on the film.
Yeah, I think that's the same for everybody.
Yeah. I mean, for me, what removes distraction is how compelling something is.
Yes, of course.
So that could be at work or, or watching a film or talking to someone. With ADHD, we are capable of hyperfocus, which is brilliant, because I never realised that was another thing when I was younger. I didn't realise was a symptom of ADHD. And I was talking to a psychiatrist once, and I said, I think I've got ADHD. And he said, can you memorise this, that and the other? And I was like, well, yeah, obviously. because people with ADHD can do that. And he said, well, that means you're not ADHD. And I found out later that's actually a symptom. So, for example, yeah,
okay, he got that wrong. She got that really wrong.
yeah, he was not very familiar with it. But for example, I was on a train in London, tube train in London once, and they used to have poems up. I don't know if they still do it. Poems up on the train for you to read, and I saw one which I really liked, and I didn't have pen or paper, and in those days we didn't have mobile phones very often. To write it down, so I memorised it on a tube journey. I can still remember most of it. I'm not going to recite it now, but
you sure?
Yeah. Now that's an example of hyperfocus. I can just sit there and memorise something if I want to, and that's what got me through university and everything, with not being focused enough to study, but managing to do it, because deadlines work really well if you've got ADHD too. That pressure gives us a nice dopamine rush.
Yeah.
If you've got an exam or a deadline, you'll get it done. Usually. And,
do you deliberately leave it a little bit late just to get the full dopamine kick and go for it right near the end?
People with ADHD don't do it deliberately, but that is what our brain is doing, because our brain is saying, we need this dopamine. And you're like, no, I want to get it done earlier, so I'm not staying up till midnight and driving myself mental about doing this, because it's quite stressful as well.
I can imagine.
Our brain's like, the ADHD's brain is like, no, we need the dopamine. You've not got enough. We're not going to find it in a sensible way. We're going to stress ourselves out by doing this thing and getting it done last minute. So it's quite a challenge. It sometimes feels like you're battling against your own brain.
Yeah, I couldn't do that at all. Like, okay, I went to university as a bit older as well, but some of the classmates who were able to pull all-nighters to put a report in, I'm like, if I did it, it'd make no sense at all. I might as well just put a weight on the keyboard. So it's interesting how the dopamine rush of it just destroyed me. It really worked against me. But I can kind of see that sort of like, go. Are you like, do you do that with other things like getting to the airport and all that kind of stuff? Is that a thing?
Yeah. It drives me bananas, because I don't like the stress that goes with it. Because I have quite a lot of anxiety, like a lot of people who are autistic ADHD, and it just makes my anxiety worse. And it's, and I'm quite often late, and I hate being late.
Yeah.
I can't, sometimes I find ways around it, but not consistently. And sometimes it's just accepting what you're like. So I used to beat myself up about it all the time. I'm always late. I'm always doing things last minute. I'm so bad. I'm so lazy. I'm so disorganized. And after I had my coaching, I still need to remind myself, because again, it's ingrained, and we all do this, don't we? We tend to beat ourselves up a lot about what we perceive as flaws. But I'm trying to live with that now. So people know, come out to if they invite me to dinner, I will be late, but I will turn up, because that's my thing. Because a lot of people cancel. That's annoying. Yeah, if you invite me to something, unless I'm infectious, or even before COVID, I was like this. Unless I'm infectious or I'm actually ill and I cannot move, I will be there. I'm not going to cancel because I'm tired. I'm not going to cancel because I don't feel like it, because I never feel like it. I will turn up. I'll be late, but I will be there. So I realised, people understand that I'm late. That's my thing. It's not going to change. And some people have caught on to that, and they tell me to be there 15 minutes early. I was about to say, if your friends worked out a buffer for that. I do it with one of my friends. I refer to him working on Elliot's Standard Time. So, and I know to adjust accordingly. Yeah, exactly. So you have to make a little adjustment, but if you need someone to be there on time, you know what to do. You tell them 15 minutes early. Because a lot of people with ADHD, I've noticed, are consistently late. So for me, for a social thing, it'll be 15 minutes. Okay. For a train, if I've got one of those tickets where you can't transfer it and it's a train, I will be there on time. Yes. Because I can't afford to buy another ticket.
Yes. Okay. Yeah.
And I balance the fact that I'm always late by the fact that I will turn up, because I like to, I like having this reputation as being reliable, because it kind of offsets what I perceive as a flaw, which is being late.
Okay. You've mentioned a few times about getting coaching. I was just thinking if anybody's listening who may think they're autistic as an adult, where would you recommend they go?
Coaching is incredibly...
Procedures, or what procedures could they go look at, or resources?
Coaching isn't free, which is bad, except you can get the government to pay for it. So if you think you will benefit from coaching in the workplace, and that includes if you're self-employed, you can apply for a government access to work grant.
Yes.
Which will pay for your coaching. The same grant will pay for help for dyslexics as well, for example software that you might use to help your reading and writing. So you can apply to access to work, and it takes... I've put my own application in, actually, not for a coach, but for a PA.
Okay.
And that was more than 6 weeks ago, but that was over Christmas. So it's supposed to take about 6 weeks before they come back to you. It's a little bit of a challenging process, but if you get your... It's not designed for people who need it.
No. I hear that all the time with the DSA and all that kind of stuff. But it's... Please fill in the form as a dyslexic person.
I know.
Come on, man. Who did this?
Yeah, exactly. And also they say, do this by the deadline. And you're like, did you not read the part where I've applied for it because I've got ADHD?
yeah. Like, refer to Article 1.
Yeah. So you can apply to access to work for a grant, and that can pay for a coach for you to help. It's not... coaching is supposed to be a limited time offer. It's not an ongoing thing. Some people do have a coach for an ongoing period of time, but the coach is there to help you work out what's going to work for you, what kind of tools you need, build your own toolkit to manage things that you find challenging, and also to encourage you to work your own way. Because I like the phrase that the US military use, which is, if it's stupid but it works, it's not stupid. And it took me a long time to get my head around that, because I always try to do things like a normal person, and now I don't. I do things my own way, even if it's weird. If it works for me, then we get stuff done and everything's fine. So if people want a coach and are in the UK and are employed or self-employed, access to work can be a way of funding it. You can also have you could ask your employer to fund it themselves. That's another option. Or especially if it's going to make you work better, because it's an investment, isn't it? Coaching, whichever way you slice it, is an investment in you or work, because you're going to work better, you're going to get more stuff done. After I had my coaching, I set up this business, for example. So I became much more efficient, less stressed, able to take care of myself properly. So, we talk about productivity a lot, and it's not about necessarily producing loads of stuff all the time. It's about working at your maximum productivity, which means building and rest, doing things the way you do, minimizing your anxiety, being able to cope with stress, all these things. And it's not just about making money, which, by the way, you do need to pay your bills and buy your jammy Dodgers.
Yeah.
Money.
Yeah.
We all need money for stuff. So it is partly about that, but it's also partly about ensuring you're happy, because when we're productive, we're building things that help people. So my business helps people.
Yes.
So if I'm productive, I am able to help more people. That's what it comes down to. There are people who've got diagnosis because of me, because they've heard me speak, and they've said to me, I'm much happier with who I am. I'm able to cope with things better. I feel like people have called it life-changing. So when we talk about productivity, we're not talking necessarily about capitalism and nose to the grindstone and making money and burning yourself out. It's about doing what you need to do to make yourself happy, and if it's right for you, to have a positive impact on other people. That's what I'm talking about when it comes to productivity, and that's what coaching can help you with. And I've just realised I've gone quite some distance from your original question now.
That's fine. All of this is great information, and you actually, what you did was expand on the original point, so that's no problem at all. I've also had some coaching sort of recently on dyslexia as well as just general coaching on career stuff. And it's amazing how much difference having somebody to talk things over with makes. And sort of elaborating on your point, I never work really hard in a job I'm miserable at, but in a job I'm really enjoying, they happen to pay me money at the end of the month so I can buy chocolate digestives. But it's I would just keep working. That's just how it is. The culture's great. You just want to deliver. And that's really where everybody wants to be in work. And that's, as an organisation, what you want your staff to feel like when they turn up, because you get more out of them. They cost you less per sort of hour in the office.
Yeah, absolutely.
I'm going to move on to really sort of how dyslexia and sort of yourself being hyperlexic, how this all can work together. Because it feels like it's two sides of a coin. And it could end up clashing really badly or being something amazing and growing into a huge thing. So I've kind of got it broke down into different things. But I thought initially, how do we communicate to each other? Because it feels very different how we see the world.
Yeah, it is. And I think sometimes we're coming from sort of, opposite ends of a spectrum, because, I can... when it comes to writing, my way of writing is very different from yours. And I will confess something to you that I've not really talked about before. I used to be really judgmental about people who couldn't write very well.
Okay, yeah.
It's partly because I'm autistic, but partly because, frankly, I was a bit of a prat, if I'm being honest. Well, I was, and I should admit to that, because I've grown a lot since then. And I was a prat, and I didn't treat people the way that they deserve to be treated. I was judgmental for no reason, because it doesn't matter if somebody can't spell. And because of this autistic thing about everything has to be done properly, so everything has to be spelled properly. And I was brought up with the idea that so many of us are, that, spelling is important and writing properly is important and grammar is important and things like that. I was
brought up with that and couldn't do it.
Yeah, and I can't imagine how difficult it is for dyslexic people to hear that when they say this is, someone says this is really important and it's something that you really, really struggle with. So I've been guilty of, being critical of people, or even judging without speaking about somebody who couldn't read or write very well, because of this idea that, and I know that a lot of dyslexics have heard this idea that if you can't read or write very well, you're not very clever. And we know that isn't true.
100%. Yep.
I think I've heard it from every single dyslexic I've spoken to, and I hear that defensively as well, because when you say to dyslexics, what do you wish people knew about dyslexia? And one of the things that comes up quite a lot is, we're not stupid. And I think, well, I know you're not stupid, but people have heard that so many times. And, I've been guilty of helping perpetuate that myth because I didn't give it enough thought. I didn't think, oh, maybe this person is fine, but they can't see the letters or they can't put them in the right order or whatever. And actually that doesn't matter. So what was the question again? Sorry, I lost track of that.
Yeah, that's fine. No, the question really, and I think you're touching on it, is that I sort of mentioned that actually being hyperlexic and dyslexic are two ends of the spectrum, and I'm sort of breaking it down into various things, how you could use them two ends of the spectrums to join together in synergy, but it could also fall apart. And you actually went down initially talked about the falling apart route, where obviously being judgmental, because if you're hyperlexic and focus on all the little details, you face and you come across a dyslexic person handing something in and it's adequate, but not to the standard that you can write. It must feel like being poked at on the very thing that you really, really love the detail on. So I could see that. And as you said about the sort of perpetuation of writing is the most important thing. And if you can't live in that world, then maybe, that's kind of an awkward thing dyslexic people face all the time. But that's kind of one of the things I want to break down really in this podcast, is how do we empathize with the sort of the other person, and then we can then come to a way of moving forwards and coming up with greater things.
One thing how I got from where I was to where I am was I actually used my hyperlexia.
Oh, interesting. Okay.
Yeah, because I realized that, a lot of dyslexics, either their spelling is mangled is quite a negative word, but there's a lot of letters in in the wrong places, or extra letters or missing letters, for example. Some dyslexics write like that. So it's kind of like you can see the word, but it's not quite what you were expecting. Or I think in your case, Matthew, when you sent me a message, you wrote it phonetically. You write some words phonetically.
Yes, I probably do, yes. Yeah.
So they sound the same, but they're spelt in not a way that I would be expecting. And what I realised, because I'm hyperlexic, I can read that really easily. Because I've got that, because I know all the words, and I can see what somebody's trying to say, and I realise it's much easier for me to read a dyslexic's writing if it's, if the spelling's quite controversial, or if it's written phonetically. It's much easier for me to do that because I've got this skill with words, and I can understand what somebody's saying quite quickly. And so I sometimes use that to to reassure people. However you want to write to me is fine, because I can understand it anyway. So you don't need to worry about it spelling correctly, because some people, occasionally it will take me a little bit longer to work it out, because some dyslexics, they use the wrong word, or they'll put the words in the wrong order or something.
Yes.
But generally I can work it out. So I tell people, however you want to write is fine. I'll be able to understand it. It's cool. And I think, so that was partly being hyperlexic, using that to be able to communicate with dyslexic people fairly effectively. And also this empathy that you talked about, because I've needed that a lot. I've needed people to understand how I work and what I'm like, and my strengths and my weaknesses. And I think using that for, understanding that people are coming from somewhere else. And one of the biggest things as well was understanding how good dyslexics are at things. Because like you, I think, we're brought up with this idea dyslexia is a bad thing. It's all deficient. Like autism or ADHD. If you've got one of these conditions, there's something wrong with you. You can't do things like a normal person, and you have to do what you can to try and overcome it or minimize it or act like a normal. And it was only fairly recently I've realized that dyslexic people are very, very good at particular things. And there are times when I've said, I need a dyslexic to help me with this because I can't do it. And an example of that is data visualization.
Okay, go on.
Well, I've been to talks and stuff on dyslexia, and the way dyslexics tend to present information is really good because it's really easy to digest. So I think that's one thing dyslexics have in common with people with ADHD. We don't necessarily want to read a lot of words. I will if it's a book I know I'm going to like. Yeah. But at a presentation, if I don't, a lot of the time, or, something on the internet when I'm working, I might not have time to read that, or I might not have the focus or whatever. So being able to present information visually is really important. And dyslexics tend to be much better at that. And also, in terms of things like metaphors and the way you see the world, is quite interesting for me. Like when you said this thing about the shadow, that was something I wouldn't have come up with because I don't tend to think in such a three-dimensional way. And they've done studies on it, and dyslexics are miles better at 3 dimensions than normal people. And if you need help with a problem, I found having a dyslexic look at your problem is a really good way of solving it, because they see things that other people don't see. So as an autistic ADHD problem solver, I will come up with a ton of ideas because of the ADHD. Some of them will suck. Some of them will be all right. With the autism, I can get into the detail of something. But one thing I can't do is look at 2 problems and find one solution that solves them both simultaneously. And a dyslexic person often can do that.
Oh, I
That's
see.
Brilliant.
Oh, I see. Yeah. Interesting, because I was trying to think from my side of the fence. I was like, well, so because that's where I'm going to go with the next question. Really, is what the ADHD autistic side brings to it that sort of the dyslexic person pull out, so almost turning what you've just said about your experience round the other way around, and that's really interesting. You can come up with multiple problems, but you may need somebody with dyslexia to look at it and come bolt solution A to D to fix the two things at once, where you had individual fixes for each thing and how that kind of works. It's fascinating hearing how your experience of that works.
Yeah, because I'm seeing it, because I'm not dyslexic, I see it sort of from the outside, and dyslexic people don't often, I think, value their skills because it's something that comes as second nature to them. Like if you were to give a dyslexic person some data and say, make this look pretty, they just do it. And if you give it to me, I'll just sit there for ages going, how can I make 19% look really cool? But because you see in shapes and patterns and all of that, you come up with, these wonderful ideas and ways of presenting things and problem solving. And I think it's looking at those shapes, even if it's metaphorically, you can see how things fit together. And I know there's a certain number of dyslexics working in, say, recruitment, because you can match things, you can match a person to a job quite well.
Ah, okay.
And I'm only guessing here, but I always thought dyslexics would be probably quite good at matchmaking because, you'd see how people would go together quite well. And that's something I really am not very good at.
Oh, I don't know. I'd be interested to know.
Yeah.
Have to dig out and see if the founder of Match.com is dyslexic.
But you do see a lot of dyslexics in entrepreneurship.
Yes.
A lot of dyslexic CEOs, being able to solve problems, spot opportunities is another dyslexic skill.
Yes. It was interesting. I was watching The Apprentice, my other half, last night, and I don't watch it, but she really enjoyed it. So she set it on, and I'm there, and I'll link to the episode in the show notes, but they do this thing and the male team are just terrible. And I'm like, it's this. And she just turns to me partway through the program. She's like, this must be like torture to you. You could just see through it all. I'm like, yeah, I don't understand why they can't work out what they're doing is utter rubbish. And why these two colours don't work together and why that app is like the most triggering thing in the world. And it makes my head hurt. And that's why one of them got fired from Mr. Sugar. But it's really interesting, that kind of thing. So you just turned it partway through it, and I was like, I don't know. Just telling me that it's just this big trigger fest for me, like of all this stuff. It just doesn't work. Because I remember we did a webinar together, and I remember you having an item, and I want to say it was like a mug or something with a picture on it. And I remember you saying you were trying to work out how to put words and stuff on it. And you said, yes, there you are. It's got it on the video behind it. And you said it's got all this wording on it, and you were trying, and then a dyslexic person, like, why don't you just put a picture of the deer on it? And you're like, oh yeah, that makes sense.
Yeah. So for the benefit of listeners, this is a Chinese teacup. It's powdered tea in a cup, and it has Chinese writing on it, which if you don't speak Mandarin or Cantonese, it would be quite challenging to read. So if somebody copied that down, it's very difficult to read. But there's a pink picture of a stag on it, which is much, much easier to find. And this is an example I use of how much easier it is to use pictures than words, not just for a dyslexic person, but for your friend who's going to the Chinese shop to buy your tea. It's easier for everyone to use some of those things that that help us communicate with dyslexic people. Yes.
I've come across that a few times. I've been out places with people, and I'm like, symbology just tells me where to go. I don't need to worry about what the words say around it. The arrows here and this and here. And I work as an engineer, and we deal with an ISO standard, ISO 7000, which controls the symbology of, particularly like if you drive a car, which you clearly do, and dive. The switches on the car, what the wiper switch looks like, what the indicator switch looks like, the little arrows on it, the little heater vents on it. That's also, we understand the world. We can get in any car anywhere in the world that signs into the standard, which is all of them. And we know how to work it. They might be different places, but you just look for the symbols. It's there, done, go. And that's kind of the nice thing about dealing with the world in symbols rather than having to read everything.
Yeah.
So you've mentioned quite a bit about like using the idea stuff from a dyslexic person. If I was working with yourself and you're harnessing me for my dyslexic strengths, what strengths can I use as a dyslexic person from you so I can harness that to help drive things forward?
So you're asking me what strengths you would use, or what strengths I would use.
What if I wanted to use your strong points? So you might come up to, for the example of you saying you're going to a dyslexic person to look at your ideas and spot the pattern to join them together. What would I come to you to do the same thing in reverse? What sort of strength would you have that I particularly would have a weakness in?
Well, in terms of ADHD, creative ideas are good. And I think together for problem solving, because I would have the idea and you might work out how to implement that, or vice versa. That's why different neurotypes work so well together. And I think with the autism, especially with me being hyperlexic, I think I was talking about how, we're almost at opposite ends of a spectrum.
Yes.
In terms of that. But it's, if you imagine that not necessarily as a line, but as a circle, you go all the way round and you can sort of almost match. So your strengths sort of fill the spaces where my weaknesses are, and vice versa. So then you get a lot of stuff done. So for example, you would be, if we were working on presenting some information, for example, I would be able to get the exact right words and spell everything correctly, and make sure everything made sense.
Yeah.
And that we were communicating with our audience with the right words. And then where you would be able to use your strengths most is how to present that, perhaps visually, or perhaps use shapes to enhance it. So we would, instead of saying, say it was a presentation, instead of having all words like a book or all pictures,
yes,
we would be able to craft something really, really good, because we would combine that. We would have a bit of words, and they would be good words, and then we would have some pictures, and they would be good pictures. And I think that's a really good example of how we could work together with our own strengths. Instead of saying to you, write something without making a mistake,
yes,
which would, or to me, make a picture that doesn't suck.
Right. Yeah.
Instead of doing that, we both do what we're good at, and then we come out with something that's really, really good and is useful for a huge range of people. So I can write something that's really good for autistic people, because, and you could make, say, some information communication symbols that's really good for dyslexic people. And when we get together and we combine all that, the stuff is good for dyslexics, autistics, people with ADHD, people who are busy, people who can't see that well, people whose second language is English. So they know a bit, but the pictures are really helping them.
Yes.
People who have the bin truck going past and they can't hear a bit.
Yeah.
Because I might be saying words and yet everything's supported by the picture. So if they miss what I'm saying, we've got the pictures there, so they've not missed too much. So you're covering off so many, you're including so many people just by working with your own strengths and using other people's strengths with that. And that's what's so great about systemic inclusion. So instead of saying, let's do the thing for the dyslexics, let's give them some software so they can read and write. Let's make them do the pictures because they're good at that. All that's good. But, when we all work together, then we include everybody. It's not just for the dyslexics anymore. It's for, the people who are, say, Chinese and aren't used to our alphabet. It's for the autistic people who, might just feel a little bit, might get excited by some of the pictures that you're putting in or you're creating, or the shapes and these analogies that you're using. That's the kind of thing that we can sometimes get on board with. We get passionate about these things. And, with the ADHD, you're not using a lot of words, written words. So it's something that, again, we can get on board with. So that's what I love about systemic inclusion, because everyone's included without it being a massive big deal.
Yes, I think you're right. And I think that's where I'd like inclusion to go. Yes, I may need some software or I may not, but actually you've employed me because of my skill set, and my skill set is because I'm dyslexic as well. That's part of the package you've employed and bought into. And I can offer you great things, and you can offer great things. And yeah, that whole idea, I think it's like the orchestra where you've got a pro violinist and a pro celloist and a pro conductor rather than somebody who can just about play all of them.
That's another really good analogy, actually.
Yeah, it's the synergistic thing, isn't it? Where everybody the individuals come together and the conductor makes sure they're on time, and they actually make a greater thing, more like a philharmonic than sort of something else where you've just got somebody who can dabble in everything. Yeah, no, I'm hoping, and there is good noise that it's all going that kind of way. I think companies are slowly becoming more and more turned on. You'll have more experience than I will of that, because obviously you go into companies as part of your profession, I suppose.
Yeah.
I want to ask you, actually, how did you get into that? How did you turn from what you were doing before into consultancy?
So I was working, I had my travel company previously, because you talked briefly about my career break. I built a company off the back of that, advising people how to do their own career breaks. So I ran that for a long time. And then I found it really, really challenging because, because of my ADHD, more so than the autism, actually.
Yeah.
I had a lot of difficulty with that. And then, once I realized I have ADHD and I am autistic, I started making ways of managing this, like I mentioned with my coach. And I thought, there are other people like me and they don't have to be struggling, and I could help those people. So that's what I started doing. And I started with individuals, and I realized I could make a bigger impact if I go into companies and do this, because you can train more people and educate more people and connect with more people at once.
Yes, yeah.
So it's a bit more that's a very autistic thing. It's very efficient. It's a very efficient way of doing things. But I really enjoy it. I'm a trained public speaker. Okay. So I'm using some of the skills that I have, because a lot of people don't know a lot about inclusive training and about how to do a presentation and things like that. And I already did. So I had that already as part of my skill set. And obviously with the words and stuff, communication is my forte, which is not for a lot of autistic people. Some autistic people are non-speaking. So they communicate a lot through writing. But obviously, my job being trained as in lots of different ways as a communicator, having done this presentation training, and also my first jobs were in editing. So,
okay.
Yeah, so my written communication is pretty good as well. So I thought I'm ideally placed to do training. I actually got some more training off my own bat. I got voice coaching, because autistic people tend to talk in a rather flat voice. We have a habit of talking in a monotone, and I was my natural voice tended to be quite flat. And if you're listening to that, it's boring. But the thing is, if I want to bore people in normal conversation, that's one thing. But the thing is, as a trainer, you have to engage people. You have to get people excited, or they won't do anything. They can't learn anything. So I went to a singing teacher to get my voice trained. So
okay, interesting.
I could learn to put more emphasis on things without necessarily using volume, to vary my pitch. So you notice my voice goes up and down a lot, and to vary things. So at times during this podcast, I've spoken quite slowly to emphasize a point. But when I'm talking about how excited I get about things, then I tend to talk very quickly, because that's quite exciting. And that variance is not only kind of keeps people awake, but it's also, we talked about systemic inclusion. You have to deal with a lot of different people, a lot of different learning styles, and people like different things. So some people like jokes. Mine aren't very funny, but I put them in anyway. Some people like stories. I took a lot of those in. Some people like visual aids, so I always bring books and toys and cups and all kinds of stuff to help emphasize a point. Some people like slides, some people like words on a slide, some people like graphs. If I'm doing something for autistics, I always put a graph in, because a lot of autistics love a graph.
Do they? Okay, noted.
Yeah, and it was dyslexics who taught me how to use things like graphs to make a point. So, for example, I've got one on diagnostic rates for men and women for autism. So I compared the men, which is 1.8% of the population, with women, which is 0.2. And on one graph, you can see the difference. But then I use the exact same information as a percentage to show it in population. So the percentage of all the population. And the interesting thing is, it's generated from the same information, but because there's so few women, the actual line for women disappears because it's so small. And then I can make a point about autistic women are literally invisible. And it was dyslexics who taught me how to use visual information to make that point.
Yeah, the power.
I would never have come up with that on my own.
Yeah, the power of visual information is
absolutely
amazing.
It's really strong, that as well. Because if I said, 0.2%, blah, 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 autistic women not really taken seriously, like, yeah, okay, get on board. But when you see, look, we have literally disappeared. We are literally invisible. People get that. People get passionate about it. And one thing that we need to understand is that we can talk all we want. We can tell people things all we want. But unless we get people passionate and emotionally engaged and wanting to make a difference, they're not going to do anything. You have to get people to care about this stuff and understand it, which is, a big part of my job.
Yeah, I think getting stuff alive off the page is kind of how I see it. It really, really works. Like just the power of some of it. You used to do it in all sorts of things, add images, and you kind of have to think what says what I'm trying to say in just one image, because everybody kind of dives into that, and then you enhance it whatever you're saying over the top. How do you find being in business with ADHD and autism? Because I understand autism can build quite a lot of anxiety, and having to sort of be your own boss, does that help, or does it make it not worse, but does it set it off a little bit more? I kind of could see it being two ways in my mind.
It's very challenging, to be perfectly honest. Even with, I've been self-employed for 17 years, and I still find it quite challenging. I'm still learning a lot of things because, my current business is only a couple of years old, but and it was growing very, very slowly because I was still working on my old business when I started this. So I'm still very much learning what works, what I need to do, the processes I need to have. The autism is very helpful in setting up processes, which is quite good. Because you realise, I tend to do it after the fact. So something will go wrong and then I think, I need a process to deal with this. Or I need a process to automate this because I know I'll forget otherwise. So the autism is helpful with that. The ADHD is very helpful with coming up with ideas.
Yes.
Very poor at the execution, but at least you've got the ideas there. And, if you execute 1 out of 10, that's fine. That's better than 0. And it's better than having no ideas. So it's a bit of a mixed bag. And one thing I've started quite recently is getting help.
Okay.
So I mentioned earlier, I've hired a PA who's amazing. She's neurotypical, which is good because I need that sort of calm skill set. She has good ideas as well. We talk about the strengths of neurodiverse people, and neurotypical people, have many talents, many strengths. There's a lot of good stuff about being neurotypical that can work very well in a diverse workplace, not just, we were talking about you and me together, but us and a normal person.
Yes.
Also brilliant.
Most definitely. And I think it's a trap that could be walked into by throwing neurotypical around, which is not what we're trying to do, trying to just differentiate. But you even look at some of the famous autistics or dyslexics, and we can cite loads of them. They have a team of people around them, and that will also include neurotypicals. Like, I can't do my job if I sat in an office full of just dyslexics, or even just dyslexics, just ADHD, and just autistics. It just doesn't, the synergy of it just doesn't happen. So it's about everybody having a role in driving a project and organisation forwards, not just.
Yeah, I have. I've built my own team now of. It's like a flexible team, so the different people can do the different things. So I've got quite a few neurotypicals in there because we appreciate neurotypicals have their own strengths, and to be perfectly honest, we need them.
Yes.
My PA, it's her neurotypical strengths that mean we work together very well, and she's also very compassionate, which I think helps. She's great. When she says, "Did you do the thing?" I'm like, "No." She's like, "All right, well, we can work on this," and so on. And I think that's having that team is really useful. And it took me a really, really long time to ask for help, because one of the things that a lot of people like me do is we try and be independent, because we spent so much of our time being excluded and having to do things on our own. And also because we're also quite skilled and talented, we believe we can do everything ourselves, because I can do a lot of stuff, to be perfectly honest.
Yeah, I'm guilty of thinking like that.
Yeah. But we can't do everything. And I think sometimes we have to admit, do you know what? I could do this, but someone else could do it a lot better and a lot quicker and with a lot less stress.
Yes. Yeah, it's like, I could teach myself how to do whatever, but I could also spend 5 minutes telling somebody else what I want, and they will produce something equally as good, if not slightly better, because they're an expert in it.
Yeah, exactly.
And I think it is very much for me personally, it's very much a byproduct of trying to work out how to make school work, that you just learn this sort of fierce independence, which has subsided as I've aged, and as I've understood my dyslexia better and understand where I can, because you end up deficit thinking for so long. Actually, when you start benefit thinking about it, you then, actually, I'm flying away doing this. And now I know how to delegate stuff off rather than just, I will do it all.
Yeah.
I could teach myself anything. What are you on about? An hour, 2 hours, 3 hours later on YouTube, I'm still doing it. And I could have quite happily have asked somebody else for help. So one thing I'm sort of going to start winding the podcast up in a minute, but one thing did pique my interest. I was scrolling through your website, and you have a list of things on your website, a list of interests, and you've got only autistic people understand. And I was like, ooh, what is this?
Well, I said earlier, autistic people, almost all autistic people, in my experience, have a special interest. And in the sort of medical traditional terminology, it's always described as obsessive or sometimes repetitive. So, some people will read or watch the same thing over and over again. And the thing about the special interests, it's kind of hard to describe, really. It's where you get totally into something, but there's something about it. It's not just how you might enjoy watching a show or how you might enjoy doing something. There's something a little bit more to it. It's very hard to, I'm really good with words, but it's very hard to put some things into words when it's, so difficult to describe to someone who doesn't experience it firsthand. So I've mentioned cooking is one of mine. That's my biggest one, because it's not just cooking, it's being obsessed with food. So I think about food a lot, and I like pictures of food, and I like thinking about what I'm going to cook, and also I enjoy feeding other people and things like that.
Yeah.
So obviously that's
how are you not really overweight?
That's a really interesting question, actually, because I was fat.
Okay.
Fat is a term used by the size acceptance movement, by the way.
Right.
It's not an insult. It's just fat is just you either are or you're not. There's nothing positive or negative about it. It's just there. So I was fat. I've been fat more than once in my life, because I've really enjoyed food so much, and also a lot of autistic people are hypointeroceptive, which means we're not very well in tune with what's going on in our bodies.
Right. Okay.
So some autistic people never get hungry, and other autistic people are hungry all the time.
Okay.
Some get full very quickly. Some don't know when they're full until significantly after they've stopped eating. So that feeling when you get over full and you think, yeah, I should have stopped some time ago. Normally for me, when I'm at the curry place, which is really good, and you're like, I'm full, but I need to eat more of this. We have that quite a lot. Yeah. So, so being a lot of, in fact, a lot of neurodiverse people are overweight. I mean, a lot of everybody is overweight, but one of the reasons that you see a certain amount of being overweight in autism and ADHD, because with autism it's the hyperinteroception sometimes. Sometimes it's not caring about what other people think as well. That's part of autism, being non-conformist, not really wanting to adhere to that skinny aesthetic that is so popular, just doing your own thing. And also with ADHD, we've got such poor impulse control. So if you came in here right now and put some gummy bears next to me, I'd eat them all. without thinking about it.
You'd be in a competition with me for that.
So, so I was fat for a while for those reasons. I find a lot. I did a lot of comfort eating as well. I've mentioned mental health issues, and a lot of people will relate to this. Comfort eating is a big thing, especially for people who have had quite challenging experiences, sometimes around food as well. And I have had eating disorders in the past. But the way I stopped being fat, partly I do exercise now because I've realised how important exercise and walking outside is for my ADHD. It helps me focus and calms me down. It's really good for anxiety. And it's the same with the hyperlexia. I thought, how am I going to use this to benefit me instead of it being problematic? So not that my hyperlexia was problematic, it was problematic in me communicating with dyslexics, but for the food thing, I was thinking, how can I use this? And I realised, because I know so much about food, I could make myself lower calorie food, more nutritious food that was tasty and delicious, and that I would enjoy cooking. So I still have a lot of the habits, but I've abandoned quite a lot of the negative thinking around food and thought about, what's nutritious, what can I make? Because I can make kale taste nice, which is challenging. Yes. But I can do that. I can make anything taste nice, except kidney beans. Kidney beans I could never get on board with. Really? But that's how I did it.
Oh, great.
Using something that had been thought by other people to be, an obsession with food. People said I was greedy. People said I was obsessed with food, and that was a bad thing. I turned that around to make it into a good thing, to make healthy food for me and my family and my friends sometimes as well. Sometimes unhealthy food, sometimes high calorie food and tasty food and comfort food, which, some people need. But so that's my biggest special. You asked me about my special interest, and I've just gone on about it for ages, which is one of the risks with an autistic person. If you ask me about their special interest, we could be here 3 hours later. Okay. So anyway, to make a Victoria sponge.
Yes, the benefit of long form podcasts is you have the room to do that.
Yeah, but seriously, we will be here all day.
No worries. I could talk about food all day. He says while sitting here hungry because we just spent 5 minutes talking about food. Okay, well, I'm going to now round the podcast out, and I have a few rapid fire questions I ask at the end of each episode.
Yeah.
Don't need quick answers for you, so there's no pressure there. Mm-hmm. So my first one is, what prejudice did you have about dyslexia that has been proven wrong?
When I was a lot younger, I thought that the inability to spell correctly was through not trying hard enough. I had no idea that dyslexic people literally see things differently. So that was a really, really important one. And it helped inform my own experience of having ADHD and thinking I wasn't trying hard enough. So it's been a weight off me and other people to understand people are doing their best. Yes. I look very different from your best, but they're doing their best.
Yes, yeah, most definitely. I think that's a good lesson for just general how we interact with other people in the world anyway. Okay. My second question, and I might sort of expand this, but initially it's how would you describe dyslexia if an alien come down and asked you what it was?
People do ask me because it's my training.
Are they aliens?
I feel like it sometimes. No, I'm joking. The way I sum up dyslexia is that dyslexics tend to see in shapes rather than detail.
And let's roll this out. So if you were now describing autism to said alien.
I use the Maori description of autism, which is, the New Zealand people.
Yes.
Maoris, yeah. It's hard to hear because it's got so many vowels in that word.
Maori, yes.
When you say Maori, it's actually, if you're not expecting it, it's a little bit hard to get on board with. So I always say the people in New Zealand.
Yeah, I have to wash the rugby analogy out of my head quickly.
The Maori word for autism translates as in their own time and space.
Oh, Oh, that's kind of cool. I like that.
Yeah. It's very hard to sum up autism.
Yes.
But I quite like that because it's very much, people don't like In Your Own World because it's too detached. I quite like it because I like being in my own world. I enjoy my own world. It's
in your own time and in your own space. Yeah, that's quite nice. And of course, the alien now has asked you about ADHD. How do you describe that to them?
People have come up with an alternative to the term ADHD, which is vast, variable attention stimulus trait, which is a more accurate description.
But not very easy to say.
No, it's not. Again, it's hard to describe ADHD. I think it's kind of where everything happens at once. It's a bit like being the Doctor in Doctor Who.
Oh, okay.
So your time's not linear, your space isn't linear. Kind of everything is happening at once, and you've got all this stuff going on all the time.
Okay, cool. And my last question of the podcast is: seeing as this is the Dyslexia Life Hacks show, is there any dyslexia life hacks you know of?
Dyslexia life hacks. I would say don't worry about your written work, because I know so many dyslexics who stress over texting someone or writing to someone or whatever. And if you chill about that, most people can understand you, even if it's not written properly. And if they're going to judge you, then you kind of don't need that person in your life anyway, because I wouldn't have wanted younger me in my life, to be perfectly honest. It's a good way of weeding out people who are not going to be on board with you, I think.
I think so. I think there is, I've cited that a few times where, why are we working so hard to impress somebody who, So, okay, well, is there anything you'd like to share or point anybody towards before we sign off?
Well, if people are interested in my work, they can look at my website, which is sparkleclass.com. If they want to follow me on Twitter, my handle is sparkleclass. And if they want to find me on LinkedIn, my name is Rachel Morgen-Trimmer, and I'm the only Rachel Morgen-Trimmer on there. I'm sorry for the dyslexics that it's such a long name.
I will link to it in the show notes, along with the rest of it. So I want to... Sorry?
And if anyone gets in touch with me, remember, I don't care how you spell. Just come and say hi. It's fine.
Right. Well, thank you very much for taking the time to talk to me about it. It's been fascinating hearing how that's your sort of world, how it works, and understanding how our two kind of neurodiversities can work together. It's been really interesting hearing your story. And thank you everybody else for listening. And I will catch you guys in the next episode. Goodbye for now.